This is episode 34 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Marion Gibson, Professor of Renaissance and Magical Literatures at the University of Exeter, and I'm the author of Early Modern Witches and Shakespeare and the Elizabethan Exorcism Controversy. Another great method for exploring the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend and yours, Cassidy Cash.
The tradition of Robin Hood was already very long running by Shakespeare's time. So by Shakespeare's time, it's well and truly an established part of popular culture.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
Mentioned by name in 3 of Shakespeare's plays, the legend of Robin Hood played a big role in the life of most dramatists in early modern England. Being a prominent figure in English folklore, his legend was a popular source of great dramatic material on stage. For William Shakespeare, Robin Hood had some very specific touchpoints. Not only was he mentioned by name, but numerous volumes of Shakespeare's contemporaries were writing and staging plays about Robin Hood, and Queen Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, famously had himself and his court dress up as Robin Hood and his merry men for a celebration. There were songs and ballads about Robin Hood being sung in Shakespeare's lifetime, and during the Gunpowder Plot, Robert Cecil even named Guy Fawkes and his associates as Robin Hoods in 1605. With the current reputation of Robin Hood as a good folk hero contrasted with the bad reputation Robert Cecil obviously had of him, I wondered exactly what was the reputation we as 21st century audience members needed to know about what the 17th century people thought about Robin Hood, and what that means for the characters we encounter in Shakespeare's plays that reference this popular folktale. To help us sort out this mystery and learn more about Shakespeare's Robin Hood is our guest today, Kathryn Roberts-Parker. Kathryn is a PhD candidate in English and musicology at the University of Sydney in Australia. She's received degrees at Sydney Conservatorium of Music as well as a degree in performance studies at the University of Sydney. Kathryn completed a master's degree in Shakespeare studies at King's College London in 2015, and with the support of John Monash Cultural Scholarship, which is a prestigious Australian award for leadership in the arts. Kathryn's current PhD research is examining the cultural significance of vocal music in Shakespeare's comedies. She's supervised by Professor Liam Semler and Dr. Alan Maddox. Kathryn has previously worked as a dramaturg and musician with ABC Radio National. She is a founder of Matriarch Theatre, an independent children's theatre company specializing in commedia dell'arte, puppetry, and slapstick. Kathryn is also the founder of Bardology, an online hub for exploring new ways of teaching, reading, and performing Shakespeare in the 21st century. Kathryn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Unlike many of the other historical references in Shakespeare's plays, Robin Hood is not obscure or hidden. Shakespeare mentions Robin Hood at least 3 times by name in Two Gentlemen of Verona, As You Like It, and Henry IV, Part 2. Is that an indication that this tale of Robin Hood was popular when William Shakespeare was writing these plays?
Yes, actually, the tradition of Robin Hood was already very long running by Shakespeare's time. So we have ballads of Robin Hood that can date back as early as 1460. And we see Robin Hood sort of being talked about and represented in narrative form from that date, but also it can be traced earlier than that across to France, and it's believed by Stephen Knight that it came across to England from France earlier than 1460. So by Shakespeare's time, it's well and truly an established part of popular culture.
Justice Silence sings a line from an unnamed Robin Hood ballad. The line is Robin Hood, Scarlet, and John in Act 5 of Henry IV, Part 2. Was this a real song that was telling the tale of Robin Hood, or was Shakespeare inventing music in this scene?
Yeah, it's interesting because there is actually a ballad called The Jolly Pinder of Wakefield, and then its subtitle is With Robin Hood, Scarlet, and John. However, we don't have any surviving prints of this ballad from before the 1660s. So what these lines in the play indicate is that this ballad was actually around earlier, which is quite interesting.
Robin Hood was strongly associated with the May Day celebrations, and people celebrating would dress up as Robin Hood or his merry men. Now, this tradition, I've read, was not common throughout all of England. It was only popular in some regions and some areas. But I do know that Henry VIII was famous for having dressed up as Robin Hood with him and his people at court. They dressed up as Robin Hood and his merry men. And that being Elizabeth I's father, it made me wonder, was this custom of dressing up as Robin Hood for May Day celebrations something that Shakespeare would have taken part in? Did it happen in his region of England?
Yeah, there are actually records of May Day celebrations happening around London, but as you noted, it mostly happened on the outskirts of rural towns and in the south of England. Again, that's because this tradition has come over from France, and so it seems to have been predominantly happening around where trade with France was happening. It was very much, again, an established part of the culture in Shakespeare's time, so it would have been something known by Shakespeare's audiences. And as to whether Shakespeare himself participated in them, there is a chance that he did, because they were very prolific in the late 16th century as a form of celebration.
In 1598, the same year that Shakespeare bought New Place and wrote Much Ado About Nothing, Anthony Munday wrote a pair of plays of the Robin Hood legend. One was called The Downfall, and the other was The Death of Robert Earl of Huntingdon. Now, that one was published in 1601. These plays are both complex, but the story of Robin Hood appears as a play within a play presented at the court of Henry VIII, and that scene was written by the real courtier, John Skelton. Now, Skelton himself is presented in the play as acting the part of Friar Tuck, and all of that leads up to me wondering if Shakespeare's Friar Tuck-like character of Falstaff might have been a representation of Robin Hood.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, but general scholarship about Falstaff is that he is modelled on Sir John Oldcastle, who was a soldier of the Lollard sect, and he's known to have lived around the same time as Henry. So, yeah, as for whether he was a Friar Tuck character, I mean, the monk in the Robin Hood tradition was one of the oldest characters to be associated with Robin Hood. So there's a chance, at least in the nature of the character, that he's being modelled in some way with that character. But I think like a stronger link is to this historical figure of Sir John Oldcastle.
Shakespeare does use the Robin Hood legend for characters in his plays, though, because in 1584, Reginald Scott identified Robin Hood with Robin Goodfellow, and that's the same character that Puck is in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, right?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So Robin Goodfellow does come up in the Robin Hood tradition. So as for what Shakespeare was trying to achieve by calling him Robin Goodfellow, I don't actually know. I think it's just an interesting representation. Puck certainly is nothing like Robin Hood in that, you know, he's a mythical character and he's otherworldly, whereas Robin Hood, you know, he's an outlaw character living in the forest. So I guess, you know, there are some similarities, but as for what Shakespeare was trying to achieve with this name association, I think it's interesting just to leave that idea open for speculation.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that they are different kinds of characters, because I'm curious about the Robin Hood legend as it was known reputation-wise for Shakespeare's audience. Robin Hood was used pretty regularly, I think, to describe things like sedition and treachery. It was even applied to Guy Fawkes and his associates around the Gunpowder Plot, being called Robin Hoods by Robert Cecil. What was the opinion of the audience of a character like Robin Hood, and does that influence how we should see characters like Puck and maybe not Falstaff, but at least these characters that definitely tie into Robin Hood? Are we supposed to read a 17th century reputation into our understanding of those characters?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because as you have observed, Robin Hood was more associated with the outlaw, the idea of the outlaw, and stealing and outsmarting sheriffs, and that's kind of how he's represented in the early ballads prior to the 17th century especially. Then what you see in the 17th century is a gentrification of Robin Hood. So he starts to become known as, well, in the play by Anthony Munday, he's called Robert Earl of Huntingdon, and then you see this in the ballads as well. He starts to become a noble character, and then by the time we get to the our time in the 20th and 21st century, he's well and truly a gentrified character. So if you're interested in that, Stephen Knight has traced through the ballads chronologically to sort of show that journey in his book, Reading Robin Hood.
Yes, we're absolutely interested. That's interesting to see the evolution there of that reputation, where it started and how it came to be what we know it as today. We'll link to that in the show notes for today's episode. Now, one other play-based Robin Hood reference comes from not a Shakespeare play, actually, but it's contemporary to Shakespeare. It's George Peele's play, Edward I, that happened in 1590. There was a Robin Hood game played by the characters in that play. Was this a thing for William Shakespeare's audience and that general time period? Were there popular Robin Hood games that Elizabethan England would play?
Yeah, so those games are part of the May Day or the May Games celebration. So what you have is a whole series of performances and games and archery and sports associated with Robin Hood as part of the spring festivity. They really are a prolific part of the culture in that time.
Now, in As You Like It, the exiled Duke Senior references the Forest of Arden and a many merry men that live there with old Robin Hood of England. So was there a real Forest of Arden?
Yeah, there is actually the Forest Ardennes in France, which is an interesting link between that play and Robin Hood, because as I said, the Robin Hood tradition is originally a French one. Now, I actually think As You Like It as a play, although it does sort of strongly associate the exiled Duke with Robin Hood in saying that they are living like Robin Hood in the forest, I think the play is actually quite strongly referencing May Games, in at least musically, in what I've looked at in that play. It's really interesting. The performance links with the style of performance of the May Games. So in that sense, there's like an association with Robin Hood festivity, rather than being an overt Robin Hood play like an Anthony Munday Robin Hood play, if that makes sense. So it's a different way of connecting with Robin Hood instead of an overt representation of him,
Sure.
Which I think is really interesting for that play.
It is very interesting. But how did Shakespeare know about this Forest of Arden, though? If it wasn't in England and it was in France, did he read about this from the legends of Robin Hood, or did he talk to people who had gone there? So you're saying this wasn't a reference by Shakespeare to a physical place. It was just another nod to the stories.
Shakespeare tends to set his plays in foreign settings. So you've got to remember that in Shakespeare's time with theatrical performance, there was a lot of censorship around what could be performed on stage. So as soon as you set something locally, you're being probably more political and more overtly controversial because you're referencing an English place, So if you give it a foreign setting, then you can get away with a lot more. And then the fact that he chose a French forest is really interesting, because Robin Hood as a tradition is a French tradition. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Really. As to how he sort of knew about Ardennes, I mean, we could ask the same question, how he knew about the Italian places that he represents in other plays.
I think it's really interesting that he originated in France, because I know I associate Robin Hood with England.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we all, yeah.
And Shakespeare did too, apparently, because the quote includes the old Robin Hood of England. But then he has him staged in the Forest of Arden, which is in France. So was there a forest in England? Like, I don't know, the film versions in the 20th century places Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest. Was there something like that in England for Shakespeare?
Yeah, so in the Robin Hood ballads, you do have mention of Sherwood Forest. And we have other ballads like Robin Hood's Progress to Nottingham. And then around Nottingham is where Sherwood Forest is.
And these are ballads that would have been around for Shakespeare. He would have heard these or read them when he was writing these plays?
Yes, that's right, yeah. Ballads were an incredibly widespread form of media in Shakespeare's time. So 1 million ballads had been sold by the year 1600. So everyone was reading them and singing them together. They had basically a culture of singing together and enjoying this kind of thing. So yeah, it's highly likely that he had read and sung these kind of ballads before.
Now, this next question melds together the 21st century with Shakespeare, and I ask it from a 21st century perspective, because one thing that surprised me in Henry IV Part 1 was when Falstaff used a reference to Maid Marian to imply that this word, that calling someone a Maid Marian, was to call them an unwomanly person, or that they accused them of unchaste behavior. And that's not at all the reputation Maid Marian has today. Why did Maid Marian have that reputation for Falstaff?
Yeah, it's really interesting because Marian is part of the French origin, so Marion, and in the French ballads and the French Robin Hood tradition, Maid Marian is quite, you know, it would be quite awful to read it for most people today, because she's usually getting molested by men, and then she's getting rescued by a Robin Hood kind of character. So that to me seems what the link might be, because, you know, she is just kind of always at the mercy of men in the French sort of medieval tradition of Robin Hood.
So Falstaff was sticking true to the historical version of Robin Hood that was available for Shakespeare. Yeah,
it seems that way. I mean, it's interesting as to you know, what elements of the French tradition had carried over to Shakespeare's time. This gives some indication of that, possibly.
Well, we've touched on several different research topics, I think, with this. You could write papers on some of the ideas that we've discussed today. But I wanted to ask you, in addition to the book that you mentioned by Stephen Knight, what are your recommendations for somebody that wants to explore this topic further, that wants to look into the legend of Robin Hood and how it relates to Shakespeare?
Yeah, I think that the Robin Hood ballads are a really good place to start, because there's so many of them. So there's quite a lot that have survived, and they're all open access. You can look at them on the University of California, Santa Barbara English Broadside Ballad Archive, which the link for that is ebba.english.ucsb.edu, or you can just look up English Broadside Ballad Archive on Google, University of California, and it should come up. There's also a Bodleian Ballad Archive, and then if you just type in Robin Hood, you'll see how many ballads that there are, and they keep getting made right up to the 19th century. So it's a really good way to trace the history of the tradition, at least in English.
Those are excellent resources. We will link to all of those in the show notes for today's episode. Now, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that is, what is the one book you would take with you on a deserted island if you could only take 1 to 2? And my friends in England tell me that I am supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those.
Yeah, I'm actually an avid Tolkien reader. I've read Tolkien every year since I was about 8 years old, so I would definitely take that, I think. Everything of Tolkien. Can I take everything all at once?
Sure, I think so. We gave you the complete works of Shakespeare. I think choosing the complete works of Tolkien are fine. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
I am finishing my PhD next year, so I'm currently just working on a concert program and some recordings of all the music I've been researching from Shakespeare's comedies. Also, sooner than that, I'm going to be posting a video blog learning the cittern, which is a little Renaissance guitar that Shakespeare's actors would have known how to play. And I'm going to be posting that on my own personal website, my PhD blog, which is called Bardology. So if you're interested in following along, you can see me do that.
I actually am already a follower over at Bardology. I was excited to learn that you were associated with that when we set this interview up. So that's exciting. We'll link to that and definitely be following, because that sounds exciting to learn about the sitar. Thank you, Kathryn Roberts-Parker, for being here today and talking with us about Robin Hood and Shakespeare. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much.
The book on Robin Hood by Stephen Knight, as well as the many ballads about Robin Hood you heard Kathryn mention in today's episode, can be found in the show notes for today. Those are all located at cassidycash.com/episode 34. That's cassidycash.com/EP34. In September 2019, I'm taking a group over with British History Tours to walk through the life of William Shakespeare. We'll be spending a couple of days in Stratford-upon-Avon, and then we'll travel over to London to see the Globe, where we'll have a private behind-the-scenes tour there, and we're hoping to get to see a play. And I want you to go with us. It would be amazing to get to meet you at all, but certainly to get to meet you in William Shakespeare's hometown would be amazing. Please consider traveling with us and get your early bird tickets while they last. There's still a few of them left, but we are only giving early bird tickets to the first 8 people who sign up. But you can still grab some of those and get all of the details about the trip at CassidyCash.com/travel Shakespeare. That's it for this week here at That Shakespeare Life. Until next time, I'm Cassidy Cash, that Shakespeare girl, and I hope your week is a Shakespeare-filled week.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.